When I become so progressive, I realize that it simply is unfair to punish those noble homeless people. And therefore, sorry, children, it's time for you to see Bobby masturbating in the park while shooting up heroin.
Today on the show, Dr. Gad Saad is back. He's a visiting professor and global ambassador for Northwood University.
In the pursuit of that noble objective, if we have to rape and murder truth, so be it.
He's the best-selling author of The Parasitic Mind and soon-to-be-released new book, Suicidal Empathy.
That one person who's truly a transgender person, their rights don't supersede the rights of the 999 biological women who spent the last 10 years training to hopefully get on the podium.
So if you're wondering how it's possible that the world seems to have lost its effing mind,
we need to espouse the position that there are no differences between men and women. And to the extent that there are differences, they must be due to social construction.
Dr. Gad Saad says it's suicidal empathy. Let's figure out what this is and how we can stop the war on science, reason, and logic.
Zero proof of that.
So much trouble.
Well, it's okay. Blame me. I'm Canadian.
Keeping it real with Jillian Michaels.
I don't know if you saw this interview I did with Sage Steele, where she asked me why I was leaving California. And I used your line. So for everybody listening who does not know, this came from a conversation that Gad and I had, and from his book, The Parasitic Mind. I said, I hold a bunch of cards in this game of woke victimology poker. And I laid them all out. And it's amazing how many people, my inner honey badger, that moment of calling bullshit on everything, of standing my ground, really resonated. I was getting messages from people everywhere. And it's because really you empowered me way back when we had our first conversation, which was somewhere around, I think, 2020, to be honest.
Right.
That where I was an expert, I needed to stand my ground. I needed to fight back. I needed to speak truths and elevate people who were brave enough to do that. And you are the guy that is really empowering so many of us to do that. So the first thing I wanted to address was your first book. For anybody who missed it, The Parasitic Mind. Let's do a quick recap, because this is really,
Sure.
I think, the foundation of our message today, or the conversation I want to have. Can you tell everybody listening what's the book about and why did you write it?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for the kind words. Very, very small correction. Forgive me. It's not my first book, Parasitic
Oh,
Mind. It's my
my.
fourth one,
Oh,
but
no.
fair enough. It's the first one that you're aware of. But Dr. Sad existed before the Parasitic Mind.
No! Oh God! This
Don't worry
is
about it.
Yeah. I'm
Uh,
not winning any awards for this job yet, and this is why, Gad.
You know,
Yeah.
it's always tricky. You never want to correct a
No.
host, but in this case, it's part of the bio. So forgive me for having corrected you on air.
You needed
Uh,
to. You needed
so
to do that. You needed to do that. Forgive me for being so ignorant. I discovered you when I
yes.
read The Parasitic
Uh,
Mind.
so
My
the
apologies.
Parasitic Mind is, in a sense, a book that covers my entire career in academia. It's now my 31st year as a professor. I can't believe that I'm saying that. I realized that there was a war on reason, on science, on logic, right? And so what I did in The Parasitic Mind is I argued that in the same way that all sorts of animals, including humans, can be parasitized by actual brain worms, I mean, literal brain worms, real parasites, they could also be parasitized by a second class of brain worms. I call those ideological brain worms, or parasitic idea pathogens. So, postmodernism is a parasitic idea, social constructivism, radical feminism, cultural relativism. All of these ideas were originally spawned within the university ecosystem, and eventually they broke free from the lab, so to speak, and then they've infected every facet of our lives. So the book basically traces the evolution of all of these ideological parasites. And then toward the end of the book, I offer a mind vaccine against this form of distorted thinking.
Then I guess not enough people are reading the book, Gad, because more and more I feel that this war on reason, science, and logic is gaining steam. And so many of us, I think this is why Rogan really strikes a nerve with people. Because I read a tweet, or no, I'm sorry, I was listening to an interview he was doing. Ironically, this one was not with you. And he was saying he feels like people are just under a spell. Like,
Yeah.
wake up. You kind of want to shake someone and say, what are you doing? What are you talking about? How can you think that an XY chromosome is the exact same as an XX chromosome? The earth is not flat. Why? And I know you talk a little bit about academia, or you've referenced it now, and you outline all of this in the book, which everybody needs to read immediately for their own sanity, and to better steelman themselves in arguments with people who have this brain parasite. Why is there a war on reason, science, and logic? This war didn't exist in my lifetime until 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I try to answer that by looking at what makes these ideological brain parasites so compelling that they can actually flourish within someone's brain. To your point, how could someone believe all this nonsense? So I argue that in the same way, take for example, let's draw an analogy with cancer. Different cancers are, behave quite differently. Pancreatic cancer may be different than leukemia and maybe different from prostate cancer, but what they certainly all have one thing in common, once you distill it to its most lowest common denominator, is that there is some form of unchecked cell division. And so in the case of these brain worms, I was trying to look, so what what is common to all these brain parasites? And my answer is that they all start with a alluring, noble objective. And then, in the pursuit of that noble objective, if we have to rape and murder truth, so be it, because there is a higher goal that we're trying to achieve. So let me give, because that sounds reasonable, but you have to give a tangible example. So take, for example, equity feminism. Equity feminism makes perfect sense. There is no reason why men and women should not have equal pay for the exact same job. There shouldn't be any institutionalized forms of sexism anywhere. And so, based on that definition of equity feminism, both you and I would put up our hand and say, yeah, yeah, count me in. I'm an equity feminist. Then the radical feminists come along and say, well, we need to push this further. In order to eradicate the patriarchal status quo, we need to espouse the position that there are no differences between men and women. And to the extent that there are differences, they must be due to social construction. There can't be any innate, biological based, evolutionary based sex differences, because then that would allow us to eradicate the sexist status quo more quickly, more easily. So, in the service of what appears to be a noble goal, if I have to rape and murder truth, so be it. And that, by the way, speaks to an important distinction that I talk about in the book. And that is the difference between deontological ethics and consequentialist ethics. Deontological ethics is an absolute statement. So if I say, to you, Jillian, it is never okay to lie, that would be a deontological position. If I said it's okay to lie in order to spare someone's feelings, that would be a consequentialist statement. Now, for many things in life, all of us are consequentialists, and that's perfectly fine. But there is a certain set of foundational principles that by definition have to be deontological. So the pursuit of truth has to be deontological. Presumption of innocence in the judicial system has to be deontological. Freedom of speech has to be deontological. So all of these brainworms evolve and flourish because you apply a consequentialist ethos to the pursuit of truth.
Meaning you allow for exceptions. out of what initially are great intentions. And
Exactly.
then these exceptions erode fundamental realities. And
Exactly.
then it doesn't seem to stop. Um, and I don't mean to reference Rogan again, but in his Netflix special, because for some reason I feel like he's just kind of that average guy that is wondering what the F is going on. And he was saying, he's like, I wish I had a tribe, right? It feels good to belong. And I completely get it, because when you're in the middle, you don't really get to belong anywhere. And I found myself wishing I could really lean into one side or another. And yet he's like, so I start talking with him. Of course, I want healthcare for people and blah blah blah. Of course, I want um, if you, access to equal education, access, blah blah blah, like all these really wonderful altruistic goals. And then it's like, well, men can have babies, and he's like, fuck. Like what? What has happened to this person that I thought I had so much in common with, and it's disturbing because it does feel like people are under a spell and you kind of want to shake them. It feels like the Matrix. And you want to give them the red pill. And I don't mean the Republican pill. I mean the like unplug from this madness.
So in the parasitic mind, I explained the idea that in chapter 2, the difference between thinking and feeling. And I argue that it's a false dichotomy to say, no, no, but humans are rational animals, as if emotions don't matter. Of course, the reality is we're both thinking animals and feeling animals. The trick of life is to know, or the challenge in life is to know when to apply the right system at the right context. So, for example, when I am
Right.
when I
Right.
am cutting through a an alleyway because I want to get home more quickly, and I see three young men loitering that look suspicious, I get a fear-based response. My heart rate starts going up, my blood pressure goes up, so my emotional system has been triggered, and it makes perfect evolutionary sense for me to have that fear-based response because emotions are autonomic, they're quickly deployed, and that's exactly what I need in this context. On the other hand, if I'm trying to do well on a calculus exam, triggering my emotional system so I start hyperventilating is probably not going to be the right way to go for me to do well on the calculus exam. Now, in the context of the parasitic mind and in the context of the Newsweek article that's coming out soon, I argue that when it comes to choosing your president, and when that president happens to be the president of the United States, or the most important country in the world, the leader of the free world, invoking your emotional system rather than your cognitive system is a disastrous reality. Now, I'm not trying to be political, and I remind people that I'm Canadian, so I don't vote in the American elections. Unlike the illegal Guatemalans who get to vote, I don't vote because I'm Canadian. Okay. Now,
Oh
what's
shit.
Kamala Harris? Kamala Harris, also known as Aristotle and Epictetus, because she is so brilliant. What is her whole strategy? It's joy, it's positive vibe, it's excitement, it's fun. Why? I'm trying to invoke, activate emotional system. Hey, please, electorate, don't think, don't be rational. Don't look at policies. When you look at me, you're happy. When you look at Ogre Orange Himmler, he's mean. He's cantankerous. Therefore, vote for me. It's fun. By the way, you might think that this only applies to, quote, low information voters. I hate that expression. No, no, no. It applies to my colleagues.
Yeah.
They are as prone to this stupidity. So I look at all of my colleagues who suddenly discovered that in the history of human thought, much more than Isaac Newton, much more than Charles Darwin, the true brilliant mind of history is Kamala Harris. Until 14 seconds ago, she was an abject moron who couldn't string together a single sentence. But now they're going to vote for her. She's fun. She's the pathway forward. She's for change, but she also happens to be the current administration. So she's changing a pathway forward. But by the way, please don't think about the fact that she is the current administration. So we should run away from the current administration because she's going to institute change. So the capacity for people to be parasitized by bad ideas, to be parasitized by their emotional system is so profound. But to me, it's so disheartening because in some cases it may not matter. But when it comes to who's going to have their finger on the proverbial red button, nuclear button, maybe you want to do more than just think about joy and fun.
Two thoughts on that. Number one, and I'm sure you'll know this better than anyone, I was watching a documentary on Netflix, and Hitler captured the entire nation with a movement called Strength Through Joy.
Bingo. You got it.
Not that I'm saying, obviously, she is not a Nazi,
Of
but
course.
there is no question somebody on her campaign was like, now let's see, how did they capture all of these people and kind of enrapture them? It was a huge thing. Google it. Like, that's my go-to. Like, there's no question. And it's like joy, 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 joy. I've seen compilations of liberal media channels and people in the Democratic Party saying joy, joy, joy.
The most remarkable demonstration of support, enthusiasm, joy.
This idea of joy.
Joy.
Being joyful is part of the American identity.
There is joy in the future. There is joy in having your boss be a black woman. There is joy in what is coming.
What we're hearing from this vice president, future president, is a message of freedom and joy.
I just love that we have this new joy.
You could see it just so filled with the joy of the work.
The fact that we saw that exuberance last night, that joy.
One is hope and joy, and the other is fear and anger.
Oh, you could really see joy and exuberance versus grievance and retribution.
People are tired of fear and anger, and so they're going to give to them the hope and the joy.
At the same time, I would tell you that somebody might say, well, it's a lesser of evil, but I appreciate that part. If they're telling me this is what I don't like about Trump, and I do see this about Kamala, and for me, I'm going to go this way because I don't like this about him. If they can at least see it, but the part that does feel crazy, like this nobody gonna wake up part, is nope, she was the least popular vice president of all time.
And she didn't get a single vote in the Democratic primary, right? So this is not Republicans or independents voting against her. When she ran in the primary for 2020, she was the first one to go out because she didn't get above 0%. She didn't get to 1%. So imagine that she's now coronated. Now, again, my position is not, I'm not a surrogate of Trump. I don't have posters of Trump in my bedroom.
I know.
But I am for rationality. I'm for thought. Now, if you come to me and say, here are the 7 substantive reasons why I think Kamala Harris is the right choice, I'm going to listen to you.
Right.
And then we can have this. But it never is that. It really is that. I mean,
I've asked the question. I've asked the question myself of everybody who says that to me. And I either hear she's pro-abortion, and I'm like, okay, I understand why many people are deeply concerned about that. That said, or I hear, isn't it exciting? She's a woman of color.
Exactly.
And it's like but now you've reduced her to the, tell me about, like, I could tell you what I love about Tulsi Gabbard. I could tell you things that I liked about Nikki Haley. I could tell you things I liked about Klobuchar. I never once was impressed by Kamala personally, and it has nothing to do with her being a Democrat. I just didn't find her personally impressive with regard to the way she spoke, her job record. She wasn't my candidate, not at any point, even when I was very heavily left. And yet it's like she's hung the moon.
She is, look, let me just add a few points. I'm going to draw a cool analogy. There's a I mean, the fancy term is tasseography. Tasseography is something that you see in the Middle East. It could either be where you read the tea leaves, or in, at least in our culture from Lebanon, that when you drink Arabic coffee or Turkish coffee, there is a residue at the bottom. So if you flip that cup, it creates certain patterns. And in Arabic culture, there is, believe me, it's going to come back to Kamala, so bear with me. Uh, because oftentimes when I start on these stories, people are like, what is he talking about? Don't worry, I bring it all home.
I'm always with you. I'm there every step of the way.
All right.
The payoff is too big, man. The payoff is just too huge.
I have, she's still alive, knock on wood. My paternal aunt was known in Arabic, you say basara. Basara means it's one who can is a fortune teller. So she can read the patterns in your coffee cup. Okay. So I remember when I was a young boy, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old in Lebanon. And when my aunt would come over, it's as if the Pope is coming over, because now this holy creature who can foresee the future is going to come over and read the stuff. And when she would look at it and read it, she would look at it and then she'd say, I see, in Arabic, you say farah, joy in your future, right? That's pretty non-specific. If I'm constipated and I have a good bowel movement tonight, that's joy. If I have sex with my wife tonight, it's joy. If tomorrow I win $10 in the lottery, it's joy. If it's sunny tomorrow, but today was rainy, that's joy. So there is an infinite number of ways by which your very non-specific prediction of there will be joy in your future could come in handy. I hope you're seeing where I'm going with this. So when lobotomized Kamala Harris speaks, it's always in broad things. I see a better future. I see cohesive communities, right?
Yeah.
Lobotomized, void of substance. It's my aunt who's telling me, right? My aunt didn't say, I see that you will be moving from Boston to Atlanta and you will be getting an 8.3% increase in your salary. Specificity is the enemy of the fortune teller. It is also the enemy of lobotomized Kamala Harris. That's why we can then resort to joy and happiness, because joy and happiness doesn't require specificity. I don't have to tell you the specific fiscal policy that will result in the removal of the current inflation rate. That's too hard. That involves this weird thing called thinking. Better invoke my feelings instead.
You know, what's interesting is that I had personally identified the most with RFK, putting the health stuff aside and the imminent threat of a nuclear war that I believe is very real. He explains things in a way that makes sense to me. So don't tell me on the left you're going to punch Putin in the nose because he's a big bully. I'm like, okay, this is not the truth about what's going on here. It's way more complicated. And then Trump is like, it would never happen if I was. And it's like, well, is that because you wouldn't have pushed for Ukraine to join NATO? Like, there's no. But Kennedy explains, like, hey, this is the history of this, and he might, you know, there might not be 100% perfect on how much money we gave to who and what, but there's something about him explaining things in detail that resonated with me, because I did pick up that these platitudes are bullshit, and if you can't make it granular, I don't trust you. But for everybody else,
even
it
if
feels
I disagree
good.
with exactly, even if you disagree with his explanation, at least there is substance, right? So I may say, you gave me 10 steps in your causal explanation. I disagree with steps 3 to 6, but my God, it demonstrates that there are neuronal firings in your brain. But I have never seen any proof. I haven't seen a single proof that Kamala Harris's cranium is not actually filled with jello. There is zero proof of that.
So much trouble.
Well, it's okay. Blame me. I'm Canadian.
Okay.
None.
Oh my
There are
God.
no
Your
neuronal
job is in
firings.
the States. Well, that's listen. I would never silence a word of it, and I don't disagree with you at all. what you have a new book coming out, which is in 2026, and we need it right now. But obviously,
I was working on it earlier this afternoon.
I need it now. And the book is for everyone watching. The book is called Suicidal Empathy. And I'm going to rant a little bit more on this. I was watching a show on YouTube that I enjoy called like Young Turks. And I cannot remember the name of the male host because I really like Anna Kasparian. But
Cenk Uygur?
That's it. That's it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
And he's fighting with a conservative, this guy, Charlie Kirk. And he's like, but you don't have any empathy. And it had to do, I believe it had to do with illegal immigration. I can't remember the exact issue, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was about. And he's saying to Charlie Kirk, you have no empathy. Like, we just want you to be empathetic. And I thought to myself, this is providing you with a moral superiority. You are the good guy because you are empathetic. You know, you have talked about how vulnerable our culture is, how vulnerable the West is, and our way of life. I see all of this, and maybe I'm not looking as broadly because I do remember the parasitic mind, and I need to go back and read it. But everything I'm seeing is coming that I find deeply offensive and scary is coming down to this dysregulated suicidal empathy. Whether it's because I'm for immigration reform, I think the country is made of immigrants. Like, I would want the best people, get in line, let's vet you, start working, pay into the system. What can you contribute? Like, that all makes sense to me. Chris Christie talked about this, and it made sense to me. Not nobody gets in, and not everybody gets in. Like, where's the common sense? But yet it's everybody gets in. And I think that was that guy, Sink, I can't pronounce his last name. His position was like, well, we're so empathetic. And if you're not, you're racist. That's the go-to. It's like you're racist, you're transphobe, you're a fat shamer. That's a beautiful one. But it's like, now you've got Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment buildings in Colorado. Like, wait a second. So all of these things that are happening that are wrecking chaos seem to me to be driven in large part by this dysregulated empathy. How does this stop? Does it stop when, because part of me, like, I hate to say this, but I almost hope the left loses, not because I left the left, because I genuinely feel they left me. You know, when Michelle Obama, who I loved, I mean, I loved her. And she's on the stage at the DNC talking about how we need to accept the medicalization of gender dysphoric children. I'm like, wait, what the fuck? You guys were against gay marriage back in 2008. How did you get here? Somebody needed to stop your train, homie. Like, you've dysregulated. So how do we get back from this? How does this?
Well, there are several. Yes, it's a big question. Let's take one at a time. So
Okay,
let's say,
sorry.
for example,
Freaking out
yeah,
on you.
let's take immigration. So let me link it to a specific reality in Quebec, which your viewers and listeners may not be familiar with. So it kind of hopefully offers added value. So in Quebec, where I reside, although this next year I'll be at Northwood University for a 1-year leave, Quebec is uniquely worried about its linguistic heritage, right? Because in the context of Canada, Canada is officially a bilingual country, but it's only bilingual largely because of Quebec, although there are other pockets of French-speaking people. There's some in Acadia, there's some in Alberta, but the great majority of French-speaking Canadians reside in Quebec, right? So that's why Quebec is called the distinct society. So because Quebecers, not the immigrant Quebecers, but the Quebecers, the French Canadians, because they are uniquely focused on preserving their language. Therefore, everything is viewed through the prism of we're going to die out because our language is going to die. They will institute certain policies that are too focused on this issue to the detriment of other issues. So, example, I've often said it even in very public settings, and I'll repeat it here. Here is Quebec's official policy. Because there are tons of French-speaking immigrants that could come from Islamic countries, it's a great idea to let in hundreds of thousands of immigrants singularly from Islamic countries, because when they then take us to be beheaded, they will, before the beheading starts, they will say bonjour. So by saying bonjour,
Oh my gosh.
the beheadings will only be happening in French. So don't worry, the head will roll off, but you will have protected the French language. Now, let me link that to say COVID policies. When you view all of the COVID policies only through the prism of if you lock down the world for eternity, then you can mitigate the spread of the virus. So it's a singular variable that you're trying to optimize rather than what the average 3-day-old pigeon should know, which is that the world is made up of multifactorial phenomena. So if you lock up children for 3 years, there will be downstream consequences of that.
Right.
Well, now suddenly people said, what? Multifactorial? We never knew this in medical school. We didn't know about this. We only knew about mitigation of, right? I mean, it's literally at that level of imbecility. But I studied applied mathematics, so I knew that the world is made up of multivariate phenomena, multiple variable. So when it comes to immigration, yes, we're a country of immigrants, but we're a country of legal immigrants. And the immigration process has to be non-parasitic, meaning
Yes.
that for me granting you entry into my society, the net benefit to my society must outweigh the costs to my society.
You don't chant
That's
death
why an
to America in the friggin'
Exactly.
streets. It's
Exactly.
bananas.
Exactly. So once you come into the country and you bring in, hey, when we become majority here, it's going to be gravity-based conversion therapy for LGBTQ people, meaning off from the highest buildings, then we don't need you here. If it's death to all Jews,
Right.
then we don't need you here.
Right.
So anybody is welcome in, as long as the net benefits outweigh the costs, as long as we can vet you, as long as any values that are contrary to the foundational values of the host society are not incongruent with each other, then come in, my brother, and please contribute to society. Otherwise, don't
Bring
let the
the
door
food,
hit your
bring the
ass on the way.
fashion, right? Like, okay, but then how? Okay, so great, you've single-handedly solved immigration.
I did.
Why can? And it was very easy, very made perfect sense to me.
Because it's not empathetic.
What is empathy actually? Is it just always self-serving? What is this emotion, and what is the evolutionary purpose of it? And then subsequently,
yeah.
how did it get dysregulated?
Beautiful. So let me step back and explain two levels of explanation when it comes to evolutionary theory. Okay. So in most scientific explanations operate at what's called the proximate level. Proximate level is explaining the how and the what of a phenomenon. So much of science, 99.9% of science operates at the proximate level. You want to understand how diabetes works? Here is how it works. What are the factors that increase the likelihood of you having a spike in your sugar? So it explains the how and the what. It's the mechanistic explanation of a phenomenon. There's a second layer that almost no person knows about, including most scientists. That's called the ultimate level of an explanation. Ultimate level doesn't mean ultimate, it's superior. It means it explains the Darwinian why. Why did the mechanism evolve to be of that form? I could address empathy from a proximate perspective, or I could address empathy to your question, what is the evolutionary reason why we would have evolved our emotional system in general and this particular emotion in particular? Well, empathy is part of the group of emotions that you would need if you're a social species, right? Because part of being a social species, for you and I to have a meaningful interaction, we have to have a process called theory of mind. Theory of mind allows me to put myself in your mind so that I can experience things through your eyes. And it is that process that then allows us to have meaningful interactions. By the way, autistic children don't have theory of mind. So one of the ways that you're able to diagnose a young child, you can't give a blood test to know if somebody has autism. So you usually administer to them a theory of mind test, which autistic children typically fail. So empathy, while distinct from theory of mind, fits that rubric, which is there is a bunch of emotional systems that are needed if you're going to live in bands, one of which is empathy, right?
Okay.
But there are also dark emotions that are part of our evolutionary repertoire. So, for example, the opposite of, say, empathy, or forgiveness and so on, those positive emotions, is vengefulness, is revenge, right? Which itself has an evolutionary argument, right? Imagine if we didn't evolve the capacity to severely retaliate if there's been wrongdoing done to us. Then we would be completely parasitized by the other, right? Because they could do anything they want to me, and they would never have to fear me retaliating. So studying emotions from an evolutionary perspective yields all sorts of new insights that if you weren't coming from an evolutionary perspective, you would never tackle.
Immediately when you talked about the necessity of vengefulness, I thought about Jesus and turning the other cheek. Why would we, and an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Why would we try to root this out? Because I try to root it out of myself, to be honest. I think of that as a very low emotion, and I think of scenarios where I would not be unable to take revenge, like if somebody hurt my child. And I think that makes me less than to this day. So why is this like a part of most, I would imagine most religions, is trying to rise above that emotion?
Look, for example, when you say, and I talk, what I'm about to say, I discuss in the parasitic mind. When you hear the prescription, don't judge lest you will be judged, the way that people take it in contemporary society, in contemporary environment, it's a deontological rule. Under no circumstances, don't ever judge someone. Who am I to judge? Who am I to write? That's not what it means. What it means, if you read it properly, is that don't be a moral hypocrite. Don't judge others if you are. It's not an indiscriminate rule to be applied across all contexts, times, and places, whereby you shut off my judging mechanism. No, no, I judge. I judge all the time. I hate those who cut off the clitorises of 5-year-old girls. I judge. I judge pedophiles. I judge. I belong to the society of judgment and decision making, right? When you study psychology of decision making, one term for decision making is judgment. Choosing between alternatives, you're making a judgment. So, this idea that to forego judging is a deontological argument is complete nonsense. It's not true. It's a misunderstanding of what that moral edict is, right? Don't be a moral hypocrite. Don't judge others for being disloyal in their marriage when you're sleeping around on your wife, and hence be morally consistent. So you see what I'm saying? So a lot of these moral prescriptions that you're likely to come up with are oftentimes misinterpreted in the most charitable of ways. Eye for an eye. I mean, yes, there is everybody goes blind, but many people understand it as eye for an eye means you kill my son, I kill yours. That's why in many places, certainly in the Middle East, it literally is a blood feud like this.
Right.
Even if you accidentally killed one of my children, it was never meant to be. The only way that the circle of justice could be completed is if I kill one of yours. So it is perfectly natural to experience the sense of vengefulness. If anything, I would argue it's barbaric if you never feel that. It's inhumane.
Wow. Okay. Speaking on empathy for a second,
Sure.
when I analyze this emotion, um, as as we get into kind of a few examples here, where you've got transgender athletes, and you want people to sort of be empathetic to what it must feel like to be transgender, the struggle this person must be going through, to understand that we have to be sensitive and respectful in having the conversation, but equally, you want the other side to appreciate that biological males, people born with XY chromosomes, are going to be physically stronger than people born with XX chromosomes. But for some reason, number one, we apply our empathy to only one side. And
Exactly.
I'm wondering, why is that happening? Why are we incapable of applying empathy? A pregnant mother, a an unborn child, like, nuanced, but I definitely see both sides of this. Now, personally, I'm pro-choice, but there's no question that I see both sides. Israel, Palestine, like, I feel for both sides of innocence. Why are we Israel, Palestine, like, what?
Yeah.
Transgender, biological. Why is this only going one way?
Yeah. So that I mean, you're asking the question that the next book is exactly meant to address, right? Which is the misapplication, the dysregulation of empathy results in policy decisions that are disastrous, right? So now we can then address the question of, but why is the dysregulation happening?
Yes.
But let's at first discuss more generally the idea of how we have all evolved to discriminate, not discriminate in the racist sense, discriminate as a psychophysical process, right? I discriminate when it comes to investing in my biological children versus random children. That doesn't make me callous. It doesn't make me Hitler. It makes me an evolutionary being that recognizes, whether consciously or not, I recognize it consciously because I'm an evolutionary scientist, but even if I didn't recognize it consciously, that my children, my biological children, are my pathway to immortality. That's why I'm willing to jump in front of a truck, have myself killed so that my children can be alive. I'm going to be less likely to engage in that behavior if I'm going to take the risk to save a kid that is in Mauritania. Not because I don't wish for children in Mauritania to live fulfilled lives, but in a world of limited resources, we've evolved the emotional, the cognitive, and the behavioral systems that mets out our investments strategically in a discriminating manner. Discriminate doesn't mean discriminate in the ACLU sense. It means discriminate between targets of my altruism. It means discriminate across targets of my empathy. You're getting a preview of the next book, by the way.
I got
I hope
it.
that people will still buy it
No, they
when it
need to
comes.
pre-order it. They will absolutely. Yes.
So, as you can see, it makes evolutionary sense that we all be strategic in the manner that we met out our investments, our time, our allocation of effort, our empathy, our compassion. What happens with the progressives, hence when you were on the left and the Cenk Uygur and so on, is that that mechanism misfires so that it alters the evolved calculus of how these things should be meted. It doesn't make evolutionary sense for you to care more about the homeless people in your children's park that are defecating, fornicating, and shooting up crystal meth more than you care about the children's rights to play without those stimuli there. But when I become so progressive, so kind hearted, I realize that it simply is unfair to punish those noble homeless people. And therefore, sorry, children, it's time for you to see Bobby masturbating in the park while shooting up heroin. So, what ends up happening with all of these decisions from the super smarmy, smart progressives is it blows up their empathy system so that it's always targeting the wrong target. to your point earlier, nobody is saying that transgender people don't have a right to live dignified lives free of bigotry. But that one person who's truly a transgender person, their rights don't supersede the rights of the 999 biological women who spent the last 10 years training to hopefully get on the podium. Life is about pros and cons. Life is about trade-offs. So no one is contesting that transgender people have rights. Their rights don't supersede those of biological women. So the entire book, Suicidal Empathy, goes through all of these decisions, demonstrating that once you have a dysregulation of this otherwise noble emotion, shit happens.
Okay. I want to talk about the way you're discriminating with your empathy. And it's like, I'll protect my kids before someone else's kids, or my wife before someone else's wife, because they are my legacy and my path to immortality. So inherently, and this is something that I've been struggling with personally, is empathy selfish? Because I always thought empathy meant you weren't selfish. You were this really good, selfless person. But as I have begun to analyze where I'm empathetic, I find it self-serving, and that makes, that's why I'm asking this bigger question of what is this emotion and why has it evolved? And you've made perfect sense of it for me. Is there a form of empathy that isn't self-serving? Like, even when I see somebody or something, like I saw an animal that was in distress and I wanted to save the animal. And I thought, like, I'm on the freeway chasing it, don't even ask. And the long and the short of it is, I was like, am I trying to stop myself from feeling deeply upset if something happens to this animal? Am I relating to the animal? Am I identifying with the animal? It's like rush hour traffic. I look like a lunatic. I'm stopping traffic. And the long and the short of it is it selfish what I'm doing when I see somebody who's struggling with something and I feel like my heart breaks and I want to fix it? I ran into a woman the other day who was morbidly obese, and she just had brain surgery. And I swear to God, I was depressed the rest of the night. And I thought, okay, this isn't because I'm some sort of great person. This is obviously triggering something in me that makes me feel like the animal on the freeway or the woman that needs help. So is empathy really selfish because it's about the part of you that is self-preserving?
It's a bit of both.
Okay.
No, that's a fantastic question. I'm gonna hit you with another one of those mind-blowing answers. Get ready.
I'm ready.
First of all, I completely empathize with your position on the animal that's in distress. I just spent 5 weeks with my family in Newport Beach, and on one of our last days in Southern California, we saw a gorgeous female seal that had just beached itself on one of the beaches in Newport Beach, and she was acting in a very strange way that you wouldn't expect. And it turns out that she was suffering from exposure to a particular algae. I can't remember the name of the disease.
It's a big thing in California.
Exactly.
It happens a lot.
I mean, literally, they're parasitized in a sense. I mean, not in the way that I've been talking, but it's literally affecting them neurologically and so on.
Yeah.
Now, the marine biology center that handles these things came over, took her. I took the phone number and I have since, like, we've been back now for almost 3 weeks. They called her, they christened her Robin. So here I am, 3,000 miles away, texting them every few days saying, can you give me an update on Robin? And to your point, there is absolutely no evolutionary benefit that I am reaping in feeling this great empathy and love and compassion for an animal. Right. So that mechanism could be channeled in different ways. Yes, empathy could be deployed for absolutely no benefits, but it's very rare.
What is it going to take then?
So what do we do?
Well, first of all, we all read Parasitic Mind because you taught me how to fight back. And that's what everyone needs to learn to do. So if you're awake and you're wondering what the hell is going on, you need to learn how to steelman your arguments and how to plant yourself firmly in your area of expertise. I mean,
so there is an immediate way to solve it, and there's a long-term way.
Give me both. Both, Doc.
So I am in the long view in that I'm trying to change people's minds. I'm trying to teach them how to critically think. I'm trying to administer the mind vaccine, inoculate them against parasitic thinking. Now, that's great, and that will be successful, but it doesn't happen overnight, right? It takes for you to read the book, internalize the book, think about it, and then maybe down the line you go, oh yes, I'm with you now. So that's the long view. The short view is you need to put people in power who could enact cataclysmic changes. That's why Donald Trump is so despised, because he is such a danger to the status quo, to the globalists, to the, in French, you say les bien-pensants, the anointed ones, the good thinkers, the people with the progressive lisp. You see, now I'm speaking with a lisp because I am haughty. I am more intelligent than you. You see my lisp? You see that progressive lisp? So that's why Trump is so reviled, because he is
does horrible shit though too, boss. Like
he does. By the way, just for you to know, in Canada, we've had now Justin Trudeau for 3 terms. Do you know
He's
how many
brutal.
thousands of people have written to me and said, oh my God, I wish I would have listened to you when you were warning us from the top of the mountain. Now, I'm saying this not to be gleeful and to be the guy who said, I told you so, but it's precisely because people get raptured. In Arabic, I may have said this before, maybe not, but it's worth repeating even if I've said it. Imagine this is the cork of the wine bottle. Do you know this? Do you know what I'm about to do? Or you never seen me do this before? Have you?
No, I don't think so.
So imagine if this is the cork of the wine bottle, okay? There's an expression in Arabic that says getting drunk by smelling the cork of the wine bottle, which basically is a euphemism. It's a metaphor for someone who is of weak constituency. In other words, I don't need to actually drink the entire bottle of wine to get drunk. I just smell it and I'm already drunk, right? Now, how does this apply to what we're talking about? Look, now I'm going to get drunk by the Kamala cork, right? Look, joy, happiness. I'm already drunk. I'm already getting, I'm swayed. You see it? Look at me. I'm getting drunk. Now, look, I'm going to get drunk on the Trump. He's disgusting. He speaks like a Bronx guy. Or Queens, right? At no point did I say I love Kamala because of her fiscal policy, or I hate Trump because of, tax policy. It's always getting drunk by the smell of the
raw
cork bottle.
emotion, how it makes you
Exactly.
feel without thinking logically through the choices of what policy they intend to implement and what that means.
That's why, by the way, I wrote the article, which is going to come out soon in Newsweek, because it's a short article. It's probably 800 words. And I'm summarizing a lot of the things that I've said here in a very succinct way, hoping to reach as many people. So I'm not telling you to vote for Trump. I'm just saying activate your cognitive system. This is too consequential a decision for you to use joy and fun as the justification for why you're choosing for one or the other. Just think, stop, think, and then choose.
And diversify your news feed. Oh my God. Because it's like, it is a one-way river of propaganda on both sides.
On both sides.
That's where it's like, please, Mother of God, for the sake of everyone's sanity, especially your own, diversify your newsfeed. Get the parasitic mind. Doc, since you have 1 million books, which one would you? I mean, parasitic mind. Elon Musk posted about it, and I was like, well, I felt a little bit special because, I mean, I knew about it years ago, but not that special because Joe Rogan knew about it way before me. So, what should people do? What can they consume of yours, especially since you don't have suicidal empathy out yet? Pre-order it. How do they immunize themselves against this or become more self-aware?
My earlier books are more technical, academic, scientific books. So they're great, but many people might find them a bit more difficult to read, although they certainly can. So I would suggest, if you're interested in, today we actually touched upon a lot of this evolutionary psychology stuff and evolutionary theory stuff. So if they're interested in that stuff, then this book right here, The Consuming Instinct, What Juicy Burgers, pornography, Ferraris, and gift-giving reveal about human nature. So this is a book where
Sounds
I
great.
demonstrate how you could apply evolutionary psychology to consumer behavior and to behavior in general. So that would be one. If you want to inoculate yourself against all of these ideological brain worms, then of course the parasitic mind. And then my most recent book, the one before the one that I'm writing now, Suicidal Empathy, is the Sad Truth about Happiness, which is a book that's very, very different than the parasitic mind. The parasitic mind is what happens to brains when things go wrong. The happiness book is what are some mindsets that we can adopt based on my personal experience, based on ancient wisdoms, based on contemporary science that can lead us to be happy. Now, that was a daunting book to write because many people have written about going back to the ancient Greeks about how to live a good life. But my personal story is unique. And so therefore, there's a really lot of fun reading in that book. While it did very well, it didn't nearly do as well as Parasitic Mind because that one was really stratospheric. So I hope that people give that one a chance. It's a great read. It's about happiness, the good life, and so on. So those are probably the 3 books that I would start with.
And your show, The Sad Truth, you've had, oh my God, I saw a statistic about this, it's like tens of millions of views.
Yeah, it's amazing because, I just opened the laptop in 2014, not having a clue whether I would get 1 viewer or 5 or 10, but I really had the sense of self-assuredness that, I think I've got a certain set of skills that maybe people will resonate with. To your kind point, or, 10 years later, 35 plus million views, millions of downloads. I mean, it's mind-blowing. And that's what, by the way, makes it difficult for me to revert back to only writing academic papers. Although I remain very much of an academic at heart, you write an academic paper, it takes you 3 years to do it, and then 50 people will cite it in 10 years. So it's very hard when you live in a world with limited time currency. Do I want to get on Jillian Michaels' show where I might reach, I don't know, thousands and thousands of people? So this is where I currently am in my career. Do I continue down the pathway of all popularizing science? And so, yeah, it's a tough decision to make, but it's a good conundrum to have.
We need you doing what you're doing. And guys, we will have all of this in the show notes. Boss, thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for coming back on. Thank you for this personal therapy session. I continue to worship at the altar. And I just love you madly. Thank you. I know it's family time. It's family time now.
Thank you.
You made that clear. Please go and say hi to the wife and the dogs.
Will do. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And make sure to let me know what guests you want to see on in the future.